I'm not looking for trouble with you, Marshal. It's Jerry here who's got me all riled up, him and that girl.
I don't know. But I'll tell you something, Doc. You better not mess around with Nate, sir.
Ken Curtis is forever remembered as Festus from Gunsmoke, the scruffy deputy with a sharp wit and a heart of gold. On screen, he won over millions with his humor and down-to-earth charm, becoming one of the most beloved faces in television westerns. But like many Hollywood stars, Ken's real life wasn't as easygoing as the characters he played. Behind the scenes, he had his share of clashes, grudges, and disappointments that he kept quiet about for most of his life. What many people don't realize is that before his death, Ken finally revealed the names of 5 stars he truly could not stand. Stars who left such an impact on him that he carried those feelings to the very end. In this video, I'll take you through those shocking confessions, uncovering the real stories behind the feuds and why Ken Curtis chose to speak out about them finally. But before we begin, if you're a fan of Ken Curtis or love old Western movies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Ken Curtis was born Curtis Wayne Gates on July 2, 1916, in the small town of Lamar, Colorado. His childhood looked nothing like the Hollywood life he would later know. In fact, it was unusual compared to most kids his age. Ken actually grew up in a jailhouse because his father, Dan Gates, was the sheriff of Bent County. Part of the job included living in a small apartment right above the county jail. Instead of playing on front lawns like other children, Ken's early playground was filled with iron bars, echoing footsteps, and the sound of cell doors closing. His mother, Nellie Sneed Gates, worked as the jail cook. She not only cared for her family, but also prepared meals for the prisoners. Ken often watched her serve food through the bars, giving him a glimpse of a world most children never saw. It was a different kind of childhood, one that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Ken Curtis showed signs of artistic talent from a young age, especially when it came to music. But during the Great Depression, practicality often outweighed dreams, and his parents encouraged him to pursue a stable career. Following their advice, Ken enrolled at Colorado College to become a doctor. For a while, he tried to follow that path, but deep down, he knew medicine wasn't where his heart was. Music kept calling him back. After 2 years, he made the bold decision to leave medical school behind and follow his passion for singing. It was a risky choice. America was still recovering from the Depression, and with World War II looming, the future felt uncertain. Even so, Ken's gamble soon began to pay off. In the early 1940s, he landed his first big break when he was invited to join Tommy Dorsey's band as a vocalist. Dorsey was already a legendary band leader, and his orchestra was one of the most popular in the country. Ken joined the group not long after Frank Sinatra had departed, which was no easy act to follow. But with his smooth voice and natural stage presence, he quickly won audiences over. It was during this time that he made a change that would define the rest of his career. On Dorsey's advice, he dropped his birth name, Curtis Wayne Gates, and adopted the name Ken Curtis. It sounded stronger, cleaner, and far more fitting for show business. Under that name, his career truly began to take shape. After making his mark on the big band circuit, Ken found an even better home for his talents in Western music. He became the lead singer of the Sons of the Pioneers, a beloved Western group with a loyal following and a string of radio and recording hits. With his warm and sincere voice, Ken helped popularize timeless classics such as Room Full of Roses and Ghost Riders in the Sky, songs that remain closely tied to the golden age of Western music. Few fans know that in the late 1940s, Ken also hosted a syndicated 15-minute radio program called Chuck Wagon Jamboree. Produced in Los Angeles, the show ran for about 2 years and aired around 131 episodes. Each episode featured Ken singing Western ballads, trading light-hearted banter with a comedy group known as the Novelty Aces, and closing with a hymn. The format, blending music with storytelling, foreshadowed the style that would later define his screen persona. Still, Ken wasn't satisfied with just being a singer. His natural charm and charisma eventually opened the door to a new career in Hollywood. By the late 1940s and into the early 1950s, he made the transition into acting, taking roles in Western-themed musicals and cowboy films, where he continued to build the legacy that would make him a household name. Curtis revealed the names of 5 people in Hollywood whom he secretly disliked the most. Number 1. James Arness. James Arness wasn't just the star of Gunsmoke, he was the face of the show. For 2 decades he played Marshal Matt Dillon, and his towering presence commanded nearly every scene. While audiences loved him, being in his shadow wasn't always easy for his co-stars. Ken Curtis, who brought the quirky and unforgettable Festus Hagen to life, had quickly become a fan favorite. Yet, despite Festus's rising popularity, he was still the deputy, always playing second fiddle to Arness's Marshal. Rumors began circulating that Curtis sometimes grew frustrated with this arrangement. Fans whispered that he longed for Festus to get the same recognition that Dillon did, but the spotlight rarely shifted away from Arness. Whether those feelings of resentment were real or simply fan speculation, one thing can't be denied. Their on-screen chemistry was remarkable, giving viewers some of the most iconic moments in television history. Number 2. Milburn Stone. Milburn Stone, who played the wise and often grumpy Doc Adams, was one of the most established actors on Gunsmoke. Having been there from the very beginning, he held a certain authority and protectiveness over his role. Ken Curtis, on the other hand, joined the show years later, and by the time he arrived, the cast had already formed its own rhythm. According to behind-the-scenes chatter, Curtis and Stone didn't always see eye to eye. Some said their disagreements came from script directions and disputes over how much time each character got on screen. Both men were known for being strong-willed, and when 2 personalities like that clash, sparks are bound to fly. Still, these disagreements were never enough to overshadow their professionalism. On screen, their interactions often came across as authentic, which may have been fueled in part by those very real tensions simmering behind the cameras. Number 3. John Mantley. When it came to producer John Mantley, the conflicts seemed less like rumors and more like reality. Mantley was known for running a tight ship. He was strict about budgets, tough on scripts, and often clashed with actors who wanted more creative input. Curtis was one of those actors. Festus had grown into a beloved character, and Curtis felt he deserved not only more screen presence, but also fairer pay. Reports suggest that Curtis and Mantley butted heads multiple times over these issues. Curtis wanted Festus to evolve into a more central figure in Dodge City, while Mantley didn't always share that vision. This tug-of-war over creativity and compensation is one of the few cases where Curtis's frustrations weren't just whispered rumors, but actual conflicts that people around the set noticed. Number 4. Amanda Blake. Amanda Blake's Miss Kitty was the heart of Dodge City, a strong, fiery, and independent woman who brought depth and warmth to the show. For years, she was one of Gunsmoke's brightest stars, adored by fans everywhere. But as time went on, and Festus grew more popular, whispers of tension between Blake and Curtis began to spread. Some claimed that Blake wasn't pleased about Curtis's growing prominence on the show, feeling as though it pulled some attention away from her long-established role. Others believed that the rivalry was exaggerated gossip fueled by fans and tabloids. Still, stories of on-set friction persisted. And yet, when you look at their scenes together, it's hard not to see the genuine chemistry between Kitty and Festus. Whether real tension existed or not, their performances never let it show, which is a testament to their professionalism. Number 5. Dennis Weaver. Before Ken Curtis ever stepped onto the Gunsmoke set, Dennis Weaver had already won over the audience as Chester Goode, Marshall Dillon's original deputy. Chester's limp and folksy charm made him a beloved character, and when Weaver left the show to pursue new opportunities, fans wondered if anyone could fill his shoes. That's when Curtis entered the picture as Festus Hagen. At first, comparisons between Chester and Festus were unavoidable, and some say Curtis always carried the weight of that comparison. While Weaver had moved on to other projects, his shadow lingered. Fans speculated that Curtis may have quietly resented Weaver's legacy, even though Festus eventually carved out his own identity and became just as beloved. Whether Curtis truly disliked Weaver or simply felt the pressure of living up to a predecessor, one thing is certain. Replacing such a popular character was no easy task, and Curtis managed to pull it off brilliantly. Ken Curtis appeared in several films that blended music with frontier storytelling, a natural match for someone who had both a talent for singing and a deep love for cowboy culture. His connection with some of the biggest names in Hollywood westerns soon followed. Ken became a regular in John Ford films, often sharing the screen with legends like John Wayne. These weren't small parts. He played meaningful roles in multiple classics and built a screen presence that stood out, even alongside stars as commanding as Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. While his film career was already impressive, Ken didn't shy away from exploring lesser-known projects. He appeared in low-budget westerns and adventure films that have since earned a devoted niche following. He wasn't chasing the biggest or most glamorous roles. Instead, he sought characters with grit, heart, and a touch of authenticity. But all of that would eventually be overshadowed by the role that defined Ken Curtis for millions, Festus Hagen. In 1964, he joined the cast of Gunsmoke, one of television's longest-running and most successful shows. At the time, the series was undergoing a major shift. Dennis Weaver, who played Chester Goode, had left, and the producers needed someone who could bring fresh energy without alienating loyal fans. Ken was the answer. Festus was meant to appear just once, but audiences immediately connected with him. His scratchy voice, down-home charm, and offbeat humor made him unforgettable. Festus was tough, but funny, loyal, but never overly sentimental. Over time, he became the heart of the show, and Ken remained in the role for 11 years, appearing in over 300 episodes. Off-screen, Ken approached the work with the same dedication he brought to the screen. He respected the show's legacy and never phoned in a performance. Even when scripts became repetitive or schedules grueling, Ken gave every scene his all. Unlike many actors who tire of being identified with a single character, he embraced it. He often said he was proud to be part of something that meant so much to people, especially at a time when television was becoming the emotional glue for American families. Yet, behind the camera and away from the spotlight, Ken's life was not without struggle. Despite his success, he faced heartbreak, made difficult choices, and endured personal tragedy that few fans ever knew about. At the center of it all was his wife, a steady presence who shaped his life and stood by him in ways most people never saw. Ken Curtis spent much of his career playing the charming cowboy and loyal sidekick, but his real-life love story was far from simple. Behind the scenes, his personal life was shaped by early heartbreaks, the pressures of Hollywood, and eventually, a love that would bring him lasting peace. Before he met Tori, the woman who would stay by his side until the very end, Ken experienced 2 marriages that ended quietly in disappointment. His first marriage was to actress Lorraine Page in 1943. At the time, Ken was just beginning his music career and taking his first steps into Hollywood, while Lorraine had a few minor acting credits and moved in similar entertainment circles. They married young, swept up in the fast-paced world of show business and the uncertainty of wartime America. The marriage didn't last long. Details are scarce, but it ended quietly and without children. Those who knew them say their careers pulled them in different directions, and they simply grew apart. Ken's second marriage drew more attention because of who he married. In 1952, he tied the knot with Barbara Ford, the daughter of legendary director John Ford. By then, Ken was already working with Ford and John Wayne on a string of successful Western films. Joining the Ford family came with prestige, but also its challenges. Barbara had grown up under the shadow of a strong and notoriously demanding father, while Ken, though admired and respected, wasn't someone who craved the spotlight or thrived in Hollywood social circles. The marriage lasted over 12 years, but the pressures of fame, Ken's commitment to Gunsmoke, and Barbara's own ambitions eventually pulled them apart. They divorced in 1964, quietly and without public drama. Ken handled it with dignity, as he did most things in his life. Just 2 years later, in 1966, Ken met Tori Ern Connolly, the woman who would change his life. Unlike his previous partners, Tori wasn't part of Hollywood and had no interest in fame. She was grounded, warm, and genuine, the kind of person who could make anyone feel like family. From the beginning, she embraced Ken not just as a celebrity, but as a man. She supported his work on Gunsmoke, yet never interfered with his public image. Their love grew through everyday moments, road trips, dinners at home, shared laughter that required no audience. Although Ken and Tori never had children together, family life was still central to their home. Tori had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Ken became a devoted father figure. He loved them fully, taught by example, and created a home filled with patience and care. Over the years, Ken often described his life with Tori as one of his greatest blessings. Tori's presence brought out a softer side of Ken. The hard-working, serious man became more relaxed and at ease. She encouraged him to slow down, stay connected to the world outside Hollywood, and enjoy life. After Gunsmoke ended, she helped him stay grounded, emotionally balanced, and free from the ego struggles that plagued many of his peers. Together, Ken and Tori traveled, not for work, but simply to experience life. From fishing trips to cross-country drives to small-town Western festivals, they cherished every moment together. Fans still recognized Ken wherever they went, but the attention never mattered. Tori welcomed it with grace, understanding the meaningful connection Ken had built with his audience. In their later years, the couple lived quietly, away from the chaos of Hollywood. They remained devoted to each other for decades, a rare achievement in any world, and especially in the entertainment industry. Yet even in this seemingly perfect love story, life behind closed doors was never completely smooth. Ken Curtis lived life away from the spotlight, a man who rarely sought out controversy. For most of his career, he carefully avoided the noise that often swirled around Hollywood fame. Yet, even someone as grounded and private as Ken couldn't completely escape attention, and a few moments in his life would stir curiosity, sometimes for reasons he never intended. The most notable incident came in 1987, long after Gunsmoke had ended its legendary run. CBS had announced a reunion TV movie titled Gunsmoke, Return to Dodge, bringing back James Arness as Marshal Matt Dillon. Fans naturally expected to see Ken Curtis return as Festus, the character he had played in over 300 episodes, and who had become one of the most beloved faces of the show. But when the special aired, Ken was nowhere to be seen, and fans immediately noticed. His absence sparked questions and disappointment. Was there a falling out? Had he retired from acting, or was he too ill to appear? The truth was far simpler, and yet frustrating to many. Ken had been asked to reprise his role, but the negotiations quickly fell apart. Multiple sources reported that he was offered what he considered a disrespectfully low salary, especially for a character so central to the show's legacy. He refused the offer, not out of ego, but out of principle. After dedicating over a decade of his life to Gunsmoke, he believed he deserved more than a pay cut for a one-time return. Some fans sympathized, while others felt disappointed or let down. The studio never publicly addressed the matter, and Ken stayed quiet, letting the silence speak for him. Another rumor that followed Ken for years claimed he had a twin brother named Chester Curtis. Fan forums and online biographies occasionally mentioned it, often citing vague eyewitness accounts or unverified sources. But there's no record of Ken having a twin, or a brother named Chester. He came from a modest-sized family, and despite the persistent speculation, no official documentation or family statement ever supported the story. Like many Hollywood myths, it grew more from imagination than fact. Perhaps the most unexpected chapter of Ken's public life involved his political views. Most actors of his era, particularly in the Western genre, avoided politics altogether. Ken, however, quietly made his preferences known. He supported Barry Goldwater during the 1964 presidential election, drawn to the Arizona senator's conservative ideals. Years later, in 1976, he campaigned for Ronald Reagan, attending a few events and speaking out in favor of the former actor turned aspiring politician. This made Ken one of the few Western stars to take a public stance on politics, a choice that drew both admiration and criticism from fans. Ken's personal life remained largely private. His wife, Tori, whom he was married to for over 3 decades, rarely appeared in public or sought the spotlight. She avoided controversy, gave few interviews, and never leveraged her husband's fame. She remained warm, friendly, and respectful toward fans and industry people alike, quietly standing beside Ken as life unfolded. But even with their calm, steady presence, life was not without its challenges. Fame fades. Health changes. Relationships evolve. For Ken and Tori, the years that followed brought trials that no television success or public admiration could shield them from. When the cameras dimmed and the scripts ended, real life remained. And that's where the toughest battles began. Ken Curtis was known to millions as the dependable, unshakable figure on screen, a man who embodied strength and reliability. But off-camera, his life told a very different story. Behind the fame and applause, Ken faced battles that no movie set could capture. From health struggles to personal doubts, his journey was far more complicated than the smooth Hollywood image suggested. Through it all, his wife, Tori, remained a constant presence, quietly supporting him through the highs and lows. In the years after his long run on Gunsmoke, Ken Curtis slowly stepped away from the bright lights of television. He didn't disappear entirely, but the whirlwind pace of his earlier career gave way to something slower and simpler. He focused on smaller projects, meaningful roles, and most importantly, more time with his wife Tori and their family. One of his final acting appearances came in 1983 when he took a recurring role in the short-lived NBC drama The Yellow Rose, a show about a modern Texas ranching family. Though the series didn't last long, Ken's presence on screen felt familiar and comforting, a reminder of the golden era of westerns that was fading fast. His last film role came in 1991 in the television movie Conager, based on a Louis L'Amour story and starring Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross. Ken played an aging stagecoach driver, a small part, but one that suited him perfectly. There was no attempt to reinvent himself or chase trends. He simply brought his quiet, authentic charm to the role, just as he always had. On April 28, 1991, Ken passed away in his sleep at the age of 74, following a heart attack. He was at home in Clovis, California, with Tori by his side. His death came as a shock to many, as he had appeared healthy to the public. There were no headlines or warnings, just a peaceful end to a life lived on his own terms. Following his wishes, Ken was cremated, and his ashes were scattered across the flatlands of Colorado, near the region where he had grown up. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had always carried the heart of the West with him, not the Hollywood version, but the real one. Quiet, tough, and deeply rooted in family and faith,